In hindsight, I should have recognized the warning signals. When you're emotionally invested in someone, it's easy for your heart to ignore warning signs that your rational mind tries to send your way. Hi, I'm Rose, and I'm here to tell you the tale of how my husband and his family came into my life. At Tech Course Solutions, where we both worked as software developers, was David. Not only was he attractive, but he exuded an air of unassuming self-assurance that immediately drew my attention. David, in contrast to several of his coworkers, could really carry on a discussion about anything other than programming. While dropping by my desk with 2 cups of coffee one morning, he inquired, "Hey, did you catch the new episode of Black Mirror last night?" Just talking about things you both liked led to more in-depth discussions, and that was the beginning. We found out that we shared a love of science fiction, like going on weekend hikes, and had the same awful taste in B-movies. We went from having short coffee breaks after work to having dinner dates, and our lunch breaks became longer. A year had gone by before I realized it, and David was eager for me to meet his relatives. As we made our way to his mom's house, he reassured me, "They're really down to earth. Mom's excited to meet you, and my sister Sarah lives there too with her husband Mike and their son Tommy." The front yard was a mess of toys, but the house within was small and clean. With her 4-year-old bouncing on her hip, Sarah opened the door before we could even knock. She yelled out, finally, as she embraced David more tightly, "Mom, they're here." Standing with an inviting grin on her face, Linda, David's mom, came out of the kitchen. She turned to me and beamingly said, "There's my successful son." She then embraced him tightly. "Plus, this has to be Rose. David has spilled the beans about you." Observed their interactions when they were having dinner. It was obvious that they were a typical family, and they were very proud of David's accomplishments at work. But I had the impression that something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was until Sarah brought up Tommy's impending birthday. "David," she added, her expression clearly one of puppy dog, "Tommy has been requesting that new Nintendo game, that one featuring prehistoric beasts." "Sarah," David got going, but his mom interrupted. "He should treat his nephew a little special. You're doing so well at that fancy tech company," Linda said with a giggle, rubbing David's hand. She then shifted her attention to me, smiling in what appeared to be a playful manner. "I just hope after the wedding he won't forget he has a mother and sister to take care of, too." I smiled politely and assumed she was joking. The topic of discussion shifted once everyone had laughed. At that moment, I failed to grasp the seriousness of her remarks. David and I tied the knot in a modest ceremony 6 months down the road. It seemed like the perfect way to start our life together when we found a lovely apartment to rent close to our workplace. Our marriage's honeymoon period was brief, to the letter. Just as we were beginning to unpack our belongings from our real honeymoon, the requests began pouring in. Sarah was the one who initially called regarding Tommy's school supplies. Next, Linda required assistance with a few household maintenance. The list of demands was unending, yet David never hesitated to reach into his wallet. I first pretended not to notice it. Despite the little sums, David was able to make a respectable living at Tech Course. It felt like death by 1,000 cuts, though, dropping $100 here and $200 there. It seemed like every week there was a new crisis that only David could handle. I decided to strike up a conversation one night after Sarah called to ask for money to buy Tommy new winter clothes. As part of our nightly ritual, I waited until David and I were washing the dishes together. I began, "Hey, darling, would you like to talk about something?" after giving it some thought. With elbows covered in soap suds, he gazed at me. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about the money for your family." His shoulders tensed up just a little bit. "Don't you think it's becoming a bit excessive?" As he wiped his hands, David's cheeks turned red with shame. I know. I'm just used to helping them out. I've been doing it since I got my first job. But your mom has a good pension, I pointed out gently. And Sarah has Mike. Shouldn't he be providing for his own family? David let out a long sigh and leaned against the counter. Mike, well, he hasn't actually worked in over a year. What? I nearly dropped the plate I was drying. Why not? He keeps quitting every job he gets. There's always something wrong. The work is too hard. The boss is unreasonable. The commute is too long. David ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. There's always an excuse. I set down the dish towel and turned to face my husband. David, I love how much you care about your family, but we need to think about our future too. We want to buy a house someday, right? Have our own children? Of course, he nodded. Then we need to start prioritizing our own family, I said softly, taking his hand. Supporting your mom and sister is kind, but we can't keep doing it at the expense of our own dreams. David was quiet for a long moment, absent, playing with my fingers. Finally, he looked up. You're right, we should be saving for our future. What if we set up a separate savings account specifically for the house? We can put a fixed amount in there every month, no touching it for any reason. That sounds perfect. I smiled, relieved he understood. We spent the rest of the evening planning our saving strategy. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly on the same page about our future. 2 months into our new savings plan, Linda invited us over for Sunday dinner. I had a nagging feeling about it, but David insisted we should go. She's still family, he said, squeezing my hand as we drove over. The tension was palpable from the moment we walked in. Sarah was setting the table, her movements sharp and angry. Mike was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Linda's smile seemed forced as she hugged David, barely acknowledging my presence. The first 20 minutes of dinner were filled with awkward small talk about the weather and Linda's garden. I pushed my meatloaf around the plate, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. David, honey, Linda began, her voice dripping with sweetness. I noticed you haven't sent any money for the past 2 months. Is everything okay at work? The clinking of forks against plates stopped. I could feel everyone's eyes on us. David cleared his throat, and I saw him straighten his shoulders, something he always did when he was nervous. Actually, Mom, he said, his voice steady but quiet, Rose and I are saving up to buy a house. We want to start our own family soon. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down, her eyes boring into me. Sarah's face turned red, and I could see the storm brewing. A house? Sarah's voice cracked. While I'm here, pregnant with my second child, barely able to afford prenatal vitamins. Do you know how expensive baby things are these days? I felt my blood begin to boil. 2 months of biting my tongue, and I couldn't hold back any more. Maybe your husband should think about that, I said, nodding toward Mike, who was still somehow managing to check his phone under the table. Sarah's face crumpled. How dare you? You're so cruel. The tears started flowing right on cue. You don't understand our situation. Mike finally looked up from his phone. Hey, I'm trying here. Do you know how hard it is to find a good job in this economy? I'm dealing with depression. Something in me snapped. Depression didn't stop you from having another baby, did it? The room exploded. Sarah wailed louder. Mike started defending himself about his job search, but Linda's voice rose above them all. You, she pointed her finger at me, face contorted with rage. You're trying to turn my son against his own family. We were happy before you came along with your selfish ideas. Selfish? I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. Wanting to build a future with my husband is selfish. Mom, stop. David tried to interrupt, but Linda was on a roll. She's poisoning your mind against us, your own mother and sister. How dare she tell us we can't have help from our own family? I couldn't take it any more. Without a word, I grabbed my purse and walked out. David followed close behind. We got into the car in silence, the sound of Linda's shouts still echoing from the house as we pulled away. The drive home was painfully quiet. I watched the street lights flash by, fighting back tears of frustration. Finally, as we pulled into our apartment complex, David spoke softly. "You were right," he said, "about everything, but maybe we need to be more gentle with them. They're not going to change overnight." I turned to look at him, saw the conflict written all over his face. Part of me wanted to argue that his family didn't deserve gentleness, that they needed a reality check, but looking at my husband's pained expression, I just nodded. The aftermath of our dinner confrontation played out in the most modern way possible. On social media, Sarah began posting daily updates that made my blood boil. Struggling to afford prenatal vitamins for my baby, pregnant and broke. Family struggle, one post read. Another showed an empty shopping cart, having to cut back on groceries this month. Sometimes I wonder how we'll manage with another little one on the way. The posts kept coming, each one more dramatic than the last. Pictures of Tommy looking sad beside empty toy store windows, long paragraphs about the importance of family support, pointed comments about some people having their priorities wrong. I caught David checking his phone constantly, his face getting more strained with each notification. One evening, after he'd been particularly quiet, I found him staring at a photo Sarah had posted of Tommy's worn-out shoes. "You can send her something," I said softly, touching his shoulder. "Small amounts, just let's keep our savings plan intact." The relief on his face was immediate, so David started sending Sarah a modest monthly amount again. Like magic, the tragic social media posts decreased, though they never completely stopped. Linda began extending dinner invitations once more, though the atmosphere was far from warm. "Would you like more potatoes, David?" Linda would ask warmly, then slide her eyes past me as if I were invisible. Sarah would only address her brother, speaking about me in the third person, even when I sat right there. "I wonder if your wife would mind passing the salt," she'd say, staring at the ceiling. I took it all in stride because while they were busy giving me the cold shoulder, something amazing was happening at work. TechCore landed a massive contract with Global Tech, one of the biggest MEs in the industry. David and I had both been instrumental in securing the deal, and our compensation reflected that. Suddenly, our combined income nearly doubled. Our savings account grew faster than we'd ever dreamed possible. We kept living modestly, but allowed ourselves a few luxuries: a new hybrid SUV to replace David's struggling sedan, a weekend trip to the coast here and there. As our bank account grew, so did our dreams. We started looking at real estate listings, discussing neighborhoods, planning for our future. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly moving forward. It was during one of our now tense family dinners that Linda dropped her latest bomb. I was quietly eating my pot roast, trying to ignore the usual cold shoulders when she cleared her throat dramatically. "Saw your vacation photos on Facebook," she announced, fixing me with an icy stare. "Palm Springs, wasn't it? That resort looked expensive." I felt David tense beside me. Here we go again, I thought. "Those infinity pools, luxury spa treatments?" Linda continued, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Really, David? I don't think it's appropriate to flaunt such a luxurious lifestyle when your sister can barely make ends meet with 2 children. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. As she spoke, the clicking of computer keys provided a steady background rhythm. Mike sat at the desk in the corner, completely absorbed in his newest video game, the 3rd new release he bought this month, by my count. I couldn't help myself. "Speaking of making ends meet," I said, gesturing toward Mike, "there are plenty of job openings in tech support at our company. The pay is good and the benefits are excellent." The clicking stopped for a moment, then resumed even louder. Sarah's face turned that familiar shade of red. You have no idea what it's like, she snapped. Try being a mother of two before you judge us. Oh, wait, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The barb stung, but I kept my face neutral. Mike continued playing his game, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. Or maybe he just didn't care. I could have pointed out that being a mother was Sarah's choice, just like having a second child while unemployed was their choice. I could have mentioned that the cost of Mike's gaming habit could probably cover those prenatal vitamins she was always complaining about on Facebook, but I didn't. Instead, I just shook my head and took another bite of pot roast. Later that night, as David and I drove home, I thought about the monthly transfers he still made to his sister's account. The amount wasn't small. It could have furnished an entire room in our future house, but our new salaries meant we could handle it without derailing our plans. Sometimes keeping the peace came with a price tag, and for now we could afford it. Meanwhile, Sarah's demands evolved from subtle hints to full-blown gift registries. Every holiday, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, Mother's Day. Yes, she expected gifts from her brother for Mother's Day, complete with a detailed list of expensive items she needed for herself and the kids. David, look at this, I said one evening, showing him the latest email from his sister. It was a Christmas list that included designer clothes, the latest iPad, and premium toys that cost more than our monthly car payment. David sighed, running his hands through his hair. I'll talk to her. This is getting ridiculous. But when he called Sarah to explain that he was already helping with monthly support, the waterworks started immediately. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone. I'll tell Mom you care more about your wife's feelings than your own family's needs. After watching David struggle through 3 such conversations, I'd had enough. While he was in the shower one evening, I opened Sarah's latest gift requirements email and started editing. The $800 designer purse became a $400 alternative. The $1,000 iPad became a $500 tablet. Every item cut exactly in half. Here, I said, showing David my revised list, this is what we're doing. He looked uncertain. Sarah won't be happy. Sarah's never happy, I pointed out, but this is still generous. When the gifts were delivered, the reaction was exactly what I expected. Sarah called David in tears, and Linda left a scathing voicemail about cheap knockoffs. At the next family dinner, they both shot daggers at me with their eyes. I just don't understand why you couldn't get the items I specifically requested, Sarah sniffed. I gave her my sweetest smile. Oh, but didn't you know? It's not about the price tag. It's the thought that counts. We put a lot of thought into choosing these alternatives. The look she gave me could have curdled milk. A year passed in this strange dance of passive-aggressive gift-giving and tense family dinners. Then came the Easter gathering that would change everything. Sarah waited until everyone was seated at the table, then stood up with what she clearly thought was a radiant expression. I have wonderful news, she announced. We're expecting baby number 3. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt David stiffen beside me. A 3rd child with no income, no home of their own. My mind spun with calculations of how much more this would add to our monthly family support payments. Mike predictably didn't look up from his phone. Linda, however, was ecstatic. "Oh, my darling," she cried, hugging Sarah. "This is wonderful news. 3 beautiful grandchildren." Then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "You should take notes, Rose. Sarah is such a wonderful example of a real woman. Here she is about to have her 3rd child, while you still haven't given David any." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. Sat down my fork carefully, making sure my voice was steady when I spoke. "I believe in doing things in the right order," I said coolly. "First, build a stable foundation, like having our own home and being able to provide for our children without depending on handouts. Then start a family." Linda and Sarah exchanged looks before breaking into artificial laughter. "Oh, Rose," Linda said condescendingly, "you're so corporate. It's not about money and houses." "No," I agreed, taking a sip of water. "It's about responsibility." The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I didn't care anymore. Let them laugh. Let them think I was cold and calculating. At least my future children would have a roof over their heads that nobody could take away. Sarah's third baby arrived in September, another boy. Meanwhile, David and I had reached our savings goal. After months of house hunting, we finally found it, our perfect home. A beautiful 2-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a kitchen that made me want to learn to cook properly. It was in an excellent school district, just a 20-minute drive from work. We spent weeks planning renovations, picking paint colors, and choosing furniture. Every room held a promise. The sunny bedroom that would make a perfect nursery, the basement we could turn into a playroom, the office space where we could work from home when needed. Then came the dinner invitation from Linda. "Mom wants us to come over tonight," David said, checking his phone. "She says it's important." Something felt off about the invitation, but I couldn't put my finger on it. When we arrived, everyone was there. Linda, Sarah, Mike, and all 3 kids. They had this strange, almost smug energy about them. Sarah was practically bouncing in her seat, while Linda wore the self-satisfied smile I'd learned to dread. So Linda began after we'd settled in. "I hear congratulations are in order. You bought a house." I nodded, still riding the high of our achievement. "Yes, we just closed last week. It's perfect for—" Linda cut me off. "That's actually what we wanted to discuss." She folded her hands on the table like a business executive about to close a deal. "You and David are still young, no children yet. You can continue living in your apartment just fine." I felt my smile freeze. "What are you getting at?" "But Sarah, my poor girl," Linda continued, her voice dripping with false concern, "has 3 beautiful children cramped up in this house. They need space to grow, a yard to play in. We've decided that you should give your new house to Sarah and her family." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but Linda's face remained serious. Sarah was nodding enthusiastically, while Mike finally looked up from his phone, showing interest for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, looking between them. "You want us to give away our house? The house we spent years saving for?" Sarah leaned forward. "I'm a mother of 3, she said, as if that explained everything. "I have a right to provide my children with proper living conditions. You can always buy another house later." My heart was racing as I looked across at David. "Do you perceive this? Can you now perceive their sense of entitlement?" However, Linda's grin expanded prior to David's response. "Oh, sweetie," she murmured, her voice etchingly gentle. "I did the right thing by my son. His allegiance is clearly defined as being to his mother and sister. Would you agree with that, David?" Bang! The plates rattled under the force of David's clenched fist. Never before had I seen him so enraged. He leaped out of his chair. Smugness crumbling into horror, Linda and Sarah genuinely flinched. "That's enough," David said with a voice that echoed down the hall. Mike did the same thing. "For a long time now, I have watched as you guilt and manipulate me. At all times, both monetarily and emotionally, I have been by your side. I've paid you to do nothing but sit around all day playing video games," he said, pointing at Mike. "You've insulted my wife, downplayed our decisions, and demanded more and more, and I have listened." David interrupted Sarah just as she was about to speak. "No, at this moment you are not allowed to speak. Over the years, I've paid you a considerable amount of money. Are you aware of this? Numerous thousands of dollars later, what gives you the gumption to demand our house now?" Linda made an attempt to step in. "David, sweetie, don't," he yelled out, "Sweetie me," from his throat. "You believe you brought me up correctly, Mom, by instilling in me the value of relying on others for financial support? Is it reasonable to expect them to vacate their property?" There was no humor in his laughter. "When I told you, you brought me up correctly, just enough to realize how poisonous this is now." I was yanked out of my chair by his strong grip on my hand. "We've finished. The end has come. Am out of cash. Farewell presents. Misleading behavior ended. Look for another person to act as your ATM." "But the children," Sarah began to weep. "They should be yours." "David," he yelled, "this is not my property. None of Rose's. All yours." He drew me closer to the entrance while retaining my hand. "Stay away from us. Refrain from sending us texts. Please refrain from sending us your wish lists. We've finished." As we departed, their expressions of shock and astonishment were the last things I could make out. David hurried over to the car, lowered himself to help me into it, and then jumped in the driver's seat. I gave in as we drew away from the curb. I snatched his face and pressed my lips against his. Softly, I murmured, "I love you," as I peered into his mouth. "I'm so proud of you." As he embraced me tightly, I could feel a little quiver in his voice. "Years ago, I should have done that. My apologies for the delay in confronting them." A deluge of frantic attempts at communication ensued throughout the next weeks. Over and over, Linda called, her voice fluctuating between threats and sobs. Long texts from Sarah describing how we were ruining her family were sent. Our long-lost kin in the Monkey Kingdom contacted us via the air to express their disapproval of our harsh treatment. However, David remained unwavering. While we concentrated on settling into our new place, he disconnected their phone lines and removed them from his social media accounts. A garden was begun, walls were painted, and furniture was purchased. With each passing day, I witnessed the burden of his family's manipulation gradually go away. David reached across the table and grabbed my hand one morning as we sipped coffee in our lovely kitchen, discussing our plans to turn one of the bedrooms into a nursery. A simple thank you was all he put out, for guiding me to my spinal column. "Thanks for modeling for me what a proper family is. Thank you for bearing with me as I worked things out." From the comfort of our living room, I am writing this with a smile on my face. The family you're born into might not always be the one you deserve. At times, you'll need to construct your own. Day by day, room by room, dream by dream, that is just what we are doing. I look over the coffee table and see the paint swatches for the nursery. Tomorrow we have our first meeting with the fertility doctor. The fact that it is our life, imperfect though it may be, is all that really counts.